Probably. Well, yeah.
It's recording now. Yeah.
Cool. So go on where you were, or unless you want to start again.
Yeah, no, I'll go on from where I was. So just thinking of the impact of, you know, Irish people overseas having two different experiences. So concerned about those at home and also having to live with COVID here, and the impact as an immigrant of the lack of freedom, the uncertainty, the anxiety, not being able to get back home if anybody's sick. If anybody has died or is dying, that's really challenging for people what to do. And no certainty that if they do leave Australia that they'll get back in. And then just living in two kind of parallel universes, you know, managing COVID here and living their lives here as an immigrant, but also worried about family and the uncertainty in Ireland and how we're both in very different places at the moment.
That sounds really hard. That
Yeah.
sounds really hard when you mention that about not being able to leave and not having the freedom. And it's not that you'd necessarily leave all the time anyway, but it's just knowing that you can't. And it feels more like I can relate to that. My father lives in Spain. He's 80. He just turned 80. And, you know, we've missed seeing each other 3 times in the last few months. And I don't know when I'll next see him. So I can kind of... I know he doesn't live as far away as Australia, but it's that feeling of when will you be able to see that person again, and just time passing. And there's grief, there's definitely grief and around this experience of COVID, for a universal grief, but what immigrants are going through, and the way you just painted that picture, it really sounds not easy at all, like really difficult actually, to be having all those concerns going on at the same time, and to feel like you're far away, and you're probably worried about people in Ireland, and like this lockdown in Ireland feels different than the first lockdown, because our children are still are in school, and they have these social bubbles where you're allowed to have, they probably have that in Australia as well, where you're allowed to have a single person or an older person is allowed to have one other person or people and they can kind of be as a family. So that's I think that's a little bit more helpful for people this time around. But I definitely think there is a sense of, because we were told we're going to go into lockdown for 6 weeks, and then we're going to open up the country hopefully for Christmas. And then it sounded like we're just going to go through a series of lockdowns and opens up until we get a vaccine. So that's kind of how it's looking. And I think the reason I restarted my Facebook Live lockdown support is I just felt like people are struggling with, I'm struggling with that. There's pandemic fatigue, you know, there is such a term. But when I looked up grief today, I was actually really surprised at how the whole COVID situation fits in so well with the grief model. And I'm sure, being a grief counsellor, you can see that yourself.
And what's really hard, it does fit in, but what's really challenging is those lack of rituals, those that togetherness, and last night I spoke with the Irish community about this, and you know, Irish people are very good at grief. We have our, you know, the wake, the month's mind, the anniversary mass. We tend to come around people when they're grieving, and that's very hard in a different culture. Australia does grief differently, and it's a very multicultural society. So those kind of go-tos for Irish people here are not available. And also there's the sentimentality of, well, if I was in Ireland now, I'd be doing this, but that's not necessarily the case, because with Ireland, there are restrictions now around grief, and we're grieving differently. So trying to support people here to do what's best for them under the current circumstances. So you can't go, or you're choosing not to go, and things are different in Ireland. What can you do here that might help you in your grief? So just looking at things they can control and what might be helpful. And that can be really challenging, especially if they feel really alone in that grief, and grief is lonely. And then the stress and anxiety, and also the pressure perhaps to come home, the expectation from the family to go back home. And they may be uncertain about that. They may have just come out on a visa a year ago or recently and said this is their chance to explore and have an adventure in Australia, and they may not be ready to leave that, and unsure and torn in what to do. So it's exacerbated by stress and uncertainty.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see. And there's lots of different, I mean, I was talking to somebody today, and I was thinking that, like, everybody, why are families going through grief and tensions and difficulties? Because everybody in the family individually is grieving for different, no matter what age you are, we're grieving something in our lives, that we've lost, the loss of freedom, the loss of predictability, this kind of universal loss of safety. Even though we kind of thought we could control things and that life was predictable, but I think this has made us realize that life is absolutely not predictable, and that makes it really hard for human beings who have this kind of threat focused brain to feel settled in that. And I think it's been really hard for people who have lost people in Ireland as well to have these funeral rituals be, completely changed beyond recognition, really, not being able to send the person off the way they would have liked to, not being able to have family come home maybe to do that. And then also I've actually heard of people feeling like that grieving process is probably going to be delayed longer because they didn't have this closure that usually comes with what you expect, So I think, and I mean, when I was looking up grief today, I was actually really surprised. I found this really brilliant article on grief. I'll share you the reference in a second, but when I find it. But anyway, it talked about 4 different types of grief when it came to coronavirus. You probably know about these. One is the anticipatory grief, which is like the anxiety that we feel about what will happen in a few months. And a lot of us are feeling that about Christmas and what's to come. Complicated grief, we all know complicated grief is a grief that goes on for longer than, I think, 6 months usually, and it can be chronic, delayed, distorted, and the feelings of loss are long lasting, disrupt your ability to do daily activities. And I suppose complicated grief reminds us that being stuck in quarantine may not be the only reason you're getting fed up with your significant other, it says here. And then cumulative grief, which was the feeling of loss experiences when there's a chain of negative events, one after the other following a loss. So it's as if life was slowly being taken away one moment at a time. So first you weren't able to come home to Ireland, say. Then you had a major event that was cancelled. Then something else, it was just like cumulatively, and I know the situation's probably different the way things went in Australia, but it was like we just suddenly lost out. My daughter didn't do her communion. We didn't go to my dad's 80th. And it seems like small things, like I wasn't able to have a book launch, big deal in the real world, but
it
compared
mattered.
to what
it mattered,
when you the first ever kind of book, but just one thing after another. But then for lots of people, I mean, obviously there was a lot of cumulative grief going on. And then this one I found really interesting, disenfranchised grief. Which is when society attempts to invalidate the grief to an individual, which leads to disenfranchisement. So at least you're still getting paid. At least, if somebody says, your child says, oh, I missed my communion and I missed it. Well, at least you'll get to do it. And if at least you're young and you'll get to do it next year, or I missed this. Well, at least, and it's this kind of like well-meaning statements, but actually it really invalidates the person's experience. So I think if there was one universal thing I would say to everybody around this is that, everybody, no matter what their age, no matter where they live, I mean, this is the first time I think an event has literally hit the entire world, and that we're all experiencing difficulties, grief for our past lives, and different concerns. They might be at a different level individually, but we're all in this, and I think sometimes that idea of common humanity, as I was
going to say, that's what you, in your book, and you talk about that a lot, the common humanity.
It just kind of sometimes helps to know that you're not alone. And I'm hoping that people in Australia and Sydney have new groups been set up, say, so for people, have people started kind of, because I always think that grief has a purpose, you know, in that a strong emotion leads you to action. So I'm just kind of wondering what actions have been brought about from the grief that people have been feeling there and from the loneliness.
Well, I think the fact that there was an information session last night on grief is amazing. And the Irish Support Agency here in Sydney organised that. And that's fantastic, because we're starting to talk about it. We're acknowledging, we're naming it and normalising it. And then the next one they're doing is looking at Christmas and how people cope around Christmas. So taking it in stages, but starting the conversation, which is so key. But I think what you said there about disenfranchised grief is huge. And I think I personally can relate to that, but I think a lot of people that we're working with can relate to that as well. Just minimizing your experience because other people are struggling or having, it's tougher for them. And I think we're probably doing that a lot here in Australia because we're very grateful that we're managing clusters, that our levels are low. And there can be kind of guilt around that, you know, because other countries aren't. So we can't complain about the little things. We can't complain about, you know, having a hard day at work or struggling in a relationship, and if we do, we kind of say, oh, well, at least I'm, you know, so you're playing
I
down.
I did it there with, you know, my book, Asher, it's not, you know, because I'm thinking somebody's going to be,
And then I think people between two different continents, two countries, are maybe playing down here because mom and dad in Ireland or family in Ireland are really struggling. So how do you communicate then as families when, sure, you're doing grand in Australia, you're fine? Well, actually, no, the stresses are really high. People are challenged in their, am I going to lose my job? You know, what's going to happen to my visa? Do we continue to have another baby here? We thought we were going to go back to Ireland, or we might stay here. All those life challenges. Do I stay? Do I go? What do I do? You know, so that I think that playing down that grief is we're well practiced at that now over the last few months.
Yeah, and it's funny, like I caught myself doing it there, you know, and then yet I'm kind of, and I'm saying on the other hand that everybody's experience is fully valid for them, and I think it's really important for everyone to feel like they're heard in that, you know, because I think, you know, grief, you know, is about, you know, I mean, connection seems to be a really important, when we grieve, we seek connection. So I think that's what's making it so hard at the moment, is that our usual ways of connecting and of nurturing ourselves aren't as available to us. You know, when you just want a hug from somebody, you just want a hug, you know, and doing the Zoom thing, and it's just not the same. It's not the same. And worrying about somebody over in Ireland and being far away, that's really, really hard. You know, that's like I even heard my dad's voice today on WhatsApp, and I was just delighted to hear that he was doing okay today, you know, you know, kind of like, whew, relief, you know, you know, seem to be holding it together, but you know, it's really hard. Absolutely.
And I guess also because when we're stressed, we tend to go, or fearful, which we are at the moment, and uncertain, we tend to go to what's safe. And for a lot of people, that's to go home, you know, and not being able to go home. And even if Australia is home, Ireland is always the place that knows you, that the safety net. And even if that's an emotional connection rather than a physical thing, it's that inability to go home to that hug, to go home to that environment that feels safe. And even if it's unsettled at the moment.
And when you say that, Orla, I think of like a situation that I'm working with at the moment that I won't disclose because it's a client, but in terms of working on safety with children when they feel unsafe, and I think this could really apply to adults as well, is, you know, and you might already do this as a counselor, but I'm thinking of, if they can't get home right now, which obviously they can't, for them to really think about what is safety for them in the environment that they currently have, you know. So for, you know, for a child, it might be a little tent in their bedroom with a couple of little stuffed animals and a few, you know, little things that smell nice and, you know, that remind them of something really safe, or even getting them to visualize or to draw what feels safe for them, because we find home physically, geographically in our homes, but we can also find home in the people that we love and that we feel most at home with. And I'm just kind of wondering, is that, you know, there's visualizations out there, as you know yourself, about your safe place and talking about safety. But I think safety is a really, really important element right now, because it's like the rug has been pulled from under us.
Yeah.
So do you think that might be helpful, kind of focusing on this idea of safety with people?
And also their internal system, you know, what calms them, what soothes them, what can they access that is working, what is secure in their world. So breaking that down, you know, who are you living with, where are you living, you know, breaking it down to find out and highlight those things that are safe. It might be their job that's safe. It might be they have a really good friend close by. So what are the things that they can rely on? What is working? What is certain in the uncertainty? So yeah, I think that's a really valuable resource. But also you were saying there around us minimizing in the disenfranchised. It's hard to look at that in isolation, because there's also gratitude for what is good. So how do you look at gratitude without minimizing your grief response? How do you say, you know, at least is a form of gratitude as well in some respects, that I am grateful that things are going well. So looking at gratitude around what you can do and how you can connect.
Yeah, and I guess what I would say to that is absolutely, it sounds, you know, but I think at least when you're in a moment of pain for the loss that you feel, whatever it is, whether it be not coming back to Ireland, not being able to go to something that you really wanted to, not doing something important, that's where the kind of idea of mindfulness comes into play, which is this idea of sitting with the feeling. And, you know, like I heard the other day on a podcast with Brene Brown that like feelings are like, you know, tunnels, and that we kind of have to get to the end of the tunnel in order to physically process the feeling, because feelings are so kind of body based. So I think the moment of gratitude is a really important one. And that's why I kind of think the gratitude, probably it's preferable if it happens at a different time and not with the at least, because when you're feeling like a lot of loss and feeling like crap because of it, I think to stay with it, and then maybe in an hour's time, when you're, I mean, I heard this great thing about habit stacking, which is like, if you're not really necessarily into kind of mindfulness, or you want a place to start, it's about kind of doing what you do every day, like be it brush your teeth or have a shower. And during that time, you can be thinking of one or two things that you're grateful for, instead of looking at your phone, say if you're, you know, brushing your teeth or whatever. So it's kind of, and just practicing those little things with your kids, if you have kids, or, but letting yourself grieve and be sad when you're sad, and that's okay. I think that's okay. I really do. Of course, once we get through the tunnel, then we come out the other end, and hopefully then our systems are ready for something different, you know, because we have so many. And then the shame of the feeling can come into play a lot. And that's why I love that idea of compassion focus there, because it really deals with the shame. Because that, I do think that disenfranchised grief comes from a little bit of either embarrassment or shame. So when I said there, you know, I missed my book launch, like no big deal, you know, it's kind of maybe a little bit of embarrassment that somebody might be watching this and thinking, Jesus, like if that's all she has to worry about, she has nothing to worry about. What the heck is she doing telling us about grief? when that's her biggest, which, you know, that's what I'm willing to share here, or not that I'm not willing to share other stuff, but I just, even the small things, like, it's okay to grieve whatever you grieve and to feel the way you feel. And we're trying to kind of bring kindness to those feelings.
Absolutely. And I guess just being okay with being in a different place with your grief. So trying to support people who are here, that they're in a different place to perhaps their friends and family in Ireland. Just because of geography, just because of season difference, time difference. I'm in the morning, you're in the evening, you know, and they're communicating with family, and they may be in a different place. They're about to go to work, or they're about to go to bed. And, you know, when is it challenging for them? That might be different to family, and family are in that experience perhaps. And as you said here, their grief may be on hold and not recognized. And what do they do with that? Because they're grieving and they're processing, but it's different. And they may have to put, you know, and I've been trying to support people to maybe think about a plan for when restrictions are lifted. Have a commitment with your family or close friends about what you might do for yourself and for the person who's died or the person who's sick, when you can go, when restrictions are lifted, so that there's something there to acknowledge that grief at a later point, but also to acknowledge it now in a point of difference.
And how is that for people? Are they managing to do that? Or? I
think they're struggling with it, but I think it gives them permission that it's actually okay, that I can't be there right now, but I want to be, and thinking creatively about how you can be there. So that might be through social media, it might be using your phone and recording something and sending it to family. It might be writing a letter to the person who's died or the person who's sick. You know, how can you be grieving now and acknowledge that grief, but perhaps the symbolism of it or the ritual might wait for you when the restrictions have lifted. So you might have a memorial service in a year's time or 2 years' time, you know, that there's something there so your grief is not lost. And I think people are kind of giving themselves permission around that, but it's taking a while.
And how, I'm just looking at the beautiful painting behind you, and it kind of just, how is spirituality helping or not helping? I'm just wondering about that, spirituality. That seems to be, and it doesn't, I'm not saying necessarily belief in God or the afterlife or whatever, but I'm just, spirituality generally, is that helping people right now? Are people becoming more spiritual? Are they connecting more with that side, or?
I think it's a bit rocky. I think what you said earlier, you know, about your world perspective has shifted because, you know, nothing is certain anymore. So the grief that goes with that is the lack of trust and certainty. So, you know, what can I lean into? What can I hold on to? And I think even if you're not religious, some of the rituals that Irish people practice around grief and death become quite important for people. So some people are leaning into that and they want to have a local service here, and they want to lean into their local community here. Other people are angry. They're like, why has this happened to me? You know, and questioning their faith and questioning their commitment to that and what they thought was certain. So I think there's a real struggle there with faith and, you know, how can I trust, and, you know, what's this all about? And almost existential crisis around, you know, what's going on in our world. So, and that can become very personal. And I suppose grief is a very individual experience. So people will either kind of gravitate towards that certainty of religion or faith, and other people and spirituality, and other people won't. They'll be angry and they'll maybe push it away. So, you know, I guess just working with people on what's fitting for them and their relationship with that at the moment. And that's challenging. I'm finding that hard.
Yeah, I'm sure. And do you just, I mean, because when I was researching this today and looking it up a bit more, do you use Kubler-Ross's stages, and then, you know, that final stage of the finding meaning? Do you use that in your work? I know it's not meant to be a linear thing. It's meant to just kind of be, you know, like concepts that might be helpful in kind of looking at grief. But are you using that in your work at the moment or not?
Not really. I use it to kind of, because it's the known processes, you know, like most people say, oh, you're in that stage of grief, or you're angry. Of course you are. That's a stage of grief. So I think it's a really well-known concept. I do believe there are grief stages, but I think, as you said, it's not linear. It's like a roller coaster. It's up and down. It's a wave of grief can hit you when you're least expect it. Some days can be good and you surprise yourself and able to manage the day. So I don't think you go through the stages and then you get to acceptance and you're grand. And I think the understanding of acceptance is misunderstood. It's like, oh, you're accepted, there's closure, you're done with grief. You're not. You might accept the person has died, but you might not like that or at all and fight that, but you've learned to start to live with it and integrate that into your life. And I think the new stage of grief, the meaning stage, is really important, because that's in our sharing of grief we find meaning. In our living life with grief we find meaning, and that mightn't be apparent for a long time. And meaning for some people is doing something with their grief. So raising money for a charity, writing a book, helping others. So there's lots of ways of creating meaning, but I think it's really hard for people at the moment to find that meaning.
I do agree. Like I had and again, I'm going to do the disenfranchised thing. 2 years ago, it was just really traumatic. It was on my birthday, and I gave my dog a piece of meat. Now, I loved my dog so much. I'm such a pet person. And I gave him a piece of meat, and she choked on it right in front of us. It was,
oh God, Molly.
It was awful. It was awful. It happened at night.
That's trauma.
The kids were, the kids were in bed. It was awful. So I'm going to get upset even.
No,
anyway.
It's awful.
But what I found, like, once I had gone through the kind of trauma of it, and, the not sleeping and the kind of the images in my mind and the goodbye to her and all of that, I just found in the weeks following that, it was like there was such a pain, and then the pain, like little bits of light came into that pain, and whatever release and relief of that pain there was felt like just beautiful in a way, because just such a relief. Maybe because I was just so tired. I think grieving is so tiring, really tiring. And then I just found that I had this energy, even as a psychologist with my clients, that somehow my pain was raw. Like I was more raw as a person. And I just found that people were connecting with me a lot more than, I'm not saying they don't usually, but I was in a more raw stage where I could feel that from them, this kind, and these really meaningful conversations that I ended up having with people around, that lots of people suddenly had lost pets or had, it was like my experience attracted all these different experiences of people around me that really helped me through. And I'm wondering, is that still possible for people right now?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's about openness as well. Like you were open to it, and you allowed your vulnerability to be curious and help other people in theirs, and it sounded like you were quite curious about your grief and the response you had to it, which also helps us when we look at our own grief, helps us help others, and helps us have a greater empathy too. And healing through that. But I think people are very vulnerable and raw. I think those words are really appropriate. And I think that in that stress state, and like we're all hypervigilant, we can be quite reactive, and I think we can feel deeply very quickly, because the feelings are right there. So you might be going through life managing all the griefs and the losses and just coping, and then suddenly something hits you and it just bubbles to the surface because it's sitting right there. And I think people are trying to understand that, like, why am I so upset? Why am I so emotional? Because you're carrying so much, and you're carrying that loss, and it makes us open to others, but it also makes us more compassionate to others. and kinder to others, and maybe kinder to ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, like I read somewhere else today about how, you know, why are you feeling like a couch potato right now? Why are you feeling more tired? You know, there's real reasons why many of us are feeling, okay, I know in Ireland we're winter and the weather is crap, obviously, but it's there's more to it than that. And I really think that what you've said there, it's like, I think we're carrying a lot more emotions than we know we are. Do you know, like you know, I'm carrying my usual kind of job and people I can't see and people on a waiting list, but I think even just hearing about people's experience of the pandemic, you know, even though I use my normal techniques of trying to kind of separate what I hear with my own home life, I do feel like I'm carrying a lot of other people's difficulties with it. I'm sure you find that yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know,
and we've had to change our work, Mally. Like, you know, just to give you a bit of a laugh, like I've got the door barricaded up here with a box and a chair in front of it in case the kids come in, you know. So
I know.
Everybody has to be quiet because mommy's on a call. And I'm going to work now for the rest of the day like this. So it's a different way of working. I'm supporting people, you're supporting people, and we're doing it remotely. Is that fantastic? Absolutely. Thank goodness we can do it. But it's tiring, it's hard, it's different. It's not the same. It's not the same as being in a room with somebody and being able to support them. So absolutely. And then before, I think as a counsellor, you're able to kind of separate, that's their stuff, this is mine, manage those boundaries, be really present for someone. But we're actually going through it as well. You know, we're feeling the stress, we're feeling the grief, we're having to manage our worlds, whether you're a parent or not. There's so much to deal with. People working from home together, couples managing that dynamic, and the lack of space, the lack of freedom, the lack of social outlets and meaningful relationships, and those connections that normally kind of fill your bucket aren't there. So you're kind of running on empty. And I feel that, you know, I'm supporting other people, and I have to stop now and again and go, what have I done for myself? Because what's in my tank to keep going?
Yeah.
And or why am I flying off the handle quickly? Because I'm carrying so much.
So what have you done, I suppose, you know, in reflecting about that? What do you think, what helps you?
What helps me is to just acknowledge it, just to be able to say to you tonight, to normalize it. It is hard. And you know, I just think even saying that is really helpful. Just saying, and you're doing your best at the moment. And I think just being able to say Zoom is tiring, supporting, it's a different type of work. Manage your appointments, manage your calls, manage your time that you do have, go for a walk, have points of punctuation in your day where you do something for you. That might be a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, you know, just stopping, having a shower at the end of the day and kind of washing it all away visually.
Yeah.
Music, having a laugh,
making sure
you laugh.
Yeah.
Making sure we couldn't do Halloween like you couldn't. We were here in the kitchen with the craziest music, makeup all over our faces, decorations everywhere, sweets everywhere, and just went mental. And I was like, what is this all about? And I was like, we just actually needed just to let loose. And the kids were dancing, we're dancing, the dogs jumping up on us. It's, you know, it was crazy, but it's actually important to laugh and just let it all go sometimes, because it's a lot we're carrying. So
I think that's, I really agree with you there. I think the whole kind of laughing and fun and just watching, I love watching just crap telly, stuff like that just completely switches me off. And the kids love when I'm just imagining you in your kitchen dancing. I'm sure they love
it wasn't a good look.
What were you dressed up as?
Oh, active wear and a really crazy wig and some horrible makeup that I put on last 5 minutes. You know, it was not a good look, but they thought it was brilliant.
I wanted to ask you a question. Like, one of the questions that I've addressed on my Facebook Live is, what parts of normal are worth rushing back to? And it was in relation to a couple of webinars I did for Planet Youth here in Galway, and where I remember just a parent saying that he had he had reflected during the lockdown, the first lockdown, lockdown 1, I can't believe we're calling it that, but during lockdown 1, he had reflected that he had brought his child to 3 birthday parties on a Saturday before the pandemic, and that he was really reflecting on whether that, you know, he was kind of thinking, why did I do that? And that was so stressful for us as a family. And we were running on kind of this energy of all these activities and all these things that you had to do for your kids in case they were talented in that area. And like, I'm not saying it was other people. Equally, my kids had something on a lot of evenings, and they're into drama. So they were doing the panto and the summer show. And we love all those things, and they love all those things. But I also found during the first lockdown that there were simplicities in life that I actually quite welcomed. And I want, like yesterday, for instance, you know, the weather wasn't good. So, and the kids wanted to play video games in the afternoon, but we said, you know, you have to do your jobs in the house first. So that involved getting rid of old sweets, cleaning up all the Halloween decorations, and they needed to do jobs before they got their Roblox or whatever, which is fair enough. But I just found that had we not been in a lockdown, possibly we would have been distracted by other things yesterday, whereas we literally, and then we played Monopoly for an hour, and you know, and then they went to bed on time because we had all this time during the day to kind of plan our day because they went to bed so late on Halloween. So I'm just wondering, for you, and from your knowledge of your clients, have people in Australia and immigrants there, has there also been a sense of we were going too fast before, and are there parts of now that people want to bring into their lives? I just wonder that.
I think so. And I think, again, that's a very personal thing. But I think some of the things that come to mind is just the commute to the city. You know, realizing your job can be perhaps hybrid, that, you know, when restrictions lift and we have a vaccine, that maybe you can work from home some days and go into the city other days, that you don't have to be feet under the desk in an office all day, every day, and doing a huge commute. So I think there's relief just in the practicality of that, that there's a lot more autonomy around people's work and trust around that. And a lot more empowerment, I suppose, you know, that, I can do my job this way and my manager trusts me, and, you know, I can work with my team this way. So a lot more autonomy around that. And then again, the traffic issue for us in a city, I think that's reduced. People can go in when they want, and hopefully we can redefine that. And I think, with regard to the activities, I think people's perspective has shifted, you know, and that real kind of keeping it real has started to occur. You know, what matters? What do I want to say yes to? And when I can say yes, you know, obviously you're in lockdown, so that's different. But when there are opportunities to do things, I think people are being more selective. They're thinking about their own self-care a little bit more too, and you know, what they need to keep for those reserves to keep going. And I think just a simple thing, like I went to the zoo for the first time in a year last week, and it was a bit eerie because there kind of was nobody there. So I felt, as an adult, I felt the sadness of that. I could feel the energy of the zoo. But my gratitude was, wow, this is fantastic. There's nobody here. We have it all to ourselves. There was no pushing, there was no shoving. There was a lot of, everybody was lovely. The staff were really friendly. And I think that locally here too, people are a lot more thinking about the local cafe, thinking about the local businesses, supporting locals, not shopping in the big malls as much, or yes, they're shopping online, but really focusing on their local community and reassessing that and spending more time in their community. So that's, and I think there's more respect, not always, but there's more respect from people to stand back and be patient and wait, because we're all trying to take care and be mindful of others. But obviously there are some people not doing that, but mostly I see people doing that.
Yeah, that's
I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, it does. It does. And it kind of makes me think of, like, in Ireland, we had 2 very distinct lockdowns. So we're now in lockdown 2, obviously, but we did have a moment, like, I do feel very grateful for what we were able to do during the summer, because in effect we did open up.
You did, yeah.
the only thing we didn't fully open were the bars, and you could go and have dinner in a restaurant for an hour and a half or 2 hours. I think I went to one restaurant during that time, which was amazing.
Yeah.
Just to get out to a restaurant, like, you know, anyway, when you've kids, it's amazing to get out. But so I do feel grateful for what we were able to have. Like, my kids both had their birthdays in September, and my daughter was able to then have her communion, and it was almost like we had a little bit of a reprieve from it. And then I think the anxiety, I guess, started building up again when we were about to go back to school, and then the numbers started to go up in September. But one thing I love, and I've heard this on I think Liz Gilbert talked about this. I love Liz Gilbert. She did a TED interview on dealing with coronavirus anxiety.
Right,
and she talked about, yeah, it's so good. I'll send you the link. You can put it up or whatever, but it's, she talked about us being stewards of our senses. And I just really love that idea of, you know, that, like, we have a choice, even though we're often inundated by stuff on our phones and on TV and around us, that actually we have a choice about, you know, say if you've had a really busy day with clients and then with family after that, putting kids to bed, you know, you have a choice about whether you then go and watch 2 hours of CNN and listen to what's going on with Trump, or, you know, or whether you have a bath, or whether you go for a walk, or whether you, I mean, I know we don't all have all the choices, but we do have choices about what we take in. And I think that's really important. Like, I kind of never thought about it in that way, but I really like that. I really like that. That helps me, because sometimes when I'm on my phone and I feel like I'm just scrolling out of just, I don't know why I'm doing it. And then I just start to feel all those feelings of, oh, they're doing better than me, or I'm, you know, just those kind of feelings of inadequacy, or feelings of overwhelm because there's too much information. Like, I wouldn't have known that stuff if I hadn't looked at it. And I actually enjoy the days that I'm with my kids, because I really kind of try to stay off my phone. And I like those weekends where I literally haven't a clue what's going on. You know, it's nice. It is actually, for me, that has been a lifesaver, actually.
And it's almost permission, isn't it, from someone else, like Liz giving us permission to do that. And I think also it taps into that grief model that you can't grieve all the time. Like, it's too exhausting. So you actually need to enjoy those moments, those opportunities to play, or to be with your kids, or to be with a friend, or just talk to someone, or watch something silly on TV. You actually need that to take a break, not only cognitively, but physically, emotionally, spiritually, to reset for those moments when it is hard, when the grief will come and hit you, or the anxiety will come and say, hi, I'm back. You know, I think it's really important to be resourced and to take those moments and not feel bad about them.
And you probably find with your clients that they do, you know, feel guilty for maybe enjoy, you know, catching themselves smile at a beautiful moment when they're meant to be grieving about their mother who's died, or something like that.
Or they're gone for a swim at Bondi Beach. I've been, you know, stereotypical here, but it's gone for a swim, and somebody at home's really struggling in Ireland, and they feel guilty. They can't talk about their day because, you know, how can I have that experience? But you can actually have joy and sadness, and you can feel both, and it's okay, and to manage that and not feel guilty about it, because it's really important, because that person in Ireland, you may be really valuable to them in the middle of the night sometime, when you are a resource to support them and they need you, and vice versa. So just giving people permission to feel happy and joy and gratitude and life is really important, and ourselves, you know.
Yeah, no, I think the body knows what to do. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, you can't be in a constant state of grief, because you just wouldn't survive that, you know, in any way. And that, therefore, it's important to also let that those chinks of light come in. I just think it's really hugely
Absolutely.
important. And I think maybe it's just not commonly known that we can have many different feelings at once or in quick succession, and that all of those are okay, and that your body is very wise. You know, like we have a wisdom in our bodies that maybe we don't give credit for, that our bodies are actually wiser sometimes than, I mean, I know we're all one, but sometimes it's about kind of going with how you feel as opposed to this isn't the right thing to be doing right now.
Yeah, when the head kicks in and you know, that shame around I should be or I'm supposed to be, you know, to try and quieten that noise of that self-criticism, which isn't helpful. And we're all guilty of that, you know, and looking at what soothes you and what's good for you and what calms you down.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm just mindful of the time because you're needing to get into your evening, and I'm also preparing my head down to get into a day of clinical work. Sorry, I have a family saying goodbye. Okay, just 1 second. Give me a second. Sorry, they're all outside looking at me. They're going to school. So I just want to thank you for this. I think just having this conversation, we could talk all night.
Yeah, we could.
There's so much to discuss and talk about, but I think it's really important we've touched on this and normalized this. And
I've learned so much from you. I've learned so much from you, and I'm actually going to talk about a bit more about this on my Facebook Live this Wednesday night. And if you could send me a copy of the recording, because I'd like to listen to it back and process it a bit more, because I just really feel that I've it's really helped me. So thank you so much.
And thank you. And I just want to say, have your book here. I love it. I recommend it all the time. And I just love how you speak. And that's what encouraged me to connect with you. You're very real about what you say. So you support not only your knowing and your expertise, but you speak it in a real way that people can connect with, and that's really important. And you give me permission in my work to use my own voice and to trust that, you know, that I don't have to stay in an academic or clinical place. It's actually okay to be real with it and come from a personal perspective as well, which supports your knowing. So thank you for doing that and giving that to people. It really, really matters.
Thank you so much, Orla. Thank you. That's such a beautiful thing to say. I really, really appreciate it. Honestly, the permission to do your amazing work is, and helping you in any way, shape or form for you to help people is truly beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you, and have a good sleep tonight. And
thank you, and good luck with your kids. I think they need you.
Thank you. They're all knocking on the window here, wanting to go to school. So it's time.
All right.
Thank you for this, and I'll send you the recording. Take care, ma'am.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.